first, a question I'll start with. Would I hire you as a proofreader? There were several things I did on that first slide to replicate for a webinar the idea of how I would stage a guest room at my hotel for a housekeeping interview. This was to see if you, my quote candidates, would instinctively notice and comment or send a question. I'm not able to see who might have done that, but if you did, I would be more likely to hire you as a proofreader. I intentionally put multiple typos, so you can rest easy that was on purpose. When I'm staging a hotel room, I might unscrew a light bulb, leave a napkin under the bed, place some thread in the sink, before asking the candidates what they noticed to get a sense of their attention to detail. So while a typo here or a dirty sink in a guest room there might not seem significant or even relevant to you, each of you has an example of these same things in your workplace, the things you want every associate to notice and fix and handle. For a restaurant server, maybe it's dirty or beat up menus you want them to notice and take care of. For a hotel bell person, it's noticing when people are struggling to carry luggage. You may have heard of the Chickfila manager who for over 20 years has been leaving a wrapper in plain sight at the entrance to see if job candidates pick up and put it in the trash or leave it when they're coming in for their interview. All these are examples of how to build experiences into our interview process and move away from using just dialogue alone when interviewing. So just for the record, here's the actual title slide. Also for the record, my first name really is spelled with an E, so that part wasn't a typo, in case anyone was keeping track. So our time together today will be spent talking about what experiential interviewing is and what its characteristics are, what it could look like to you, and then also some tools that you can take back to work in your organization to hopefully make your interviewing process more meaningful and more streamlined. That staging of typos in the first slide, that's one thing we can do in experiential interviewing, and more examples to come. On the last slide today, you will see my email address, and I invite you to please contact me if you would like me to send you any of the templates we discussed or just to talk about anything interviewing or anything else. So to begin, let's talk about what experiential interviewing really is. It's probably no surprise that it's an experience. It's more than a conversation. It has to be if you want to get the right candidate that will stick around. Of course, dialogue alone is an experience when we're just talking, but think about how we experience the world. We experience it through all of our senses. When someone comes in for an interview, traditionally we focus on just dialogue, and my least favorite questions, like what's one strength and one weakness, or why did you leave your last job? It's usually a one-size-fits-all process for many of us. And as we continue through our time together, I want you to consider what interviewing should not only sound like, but also look like, smell like, or taste like. I know that sounds crazy, but after all, we are in hospitality. We have smells and tastes. I keep thinking about if DoubleTree would serve their amazing 800-calorie cookies to every applicant. Now that would be an experience, but think about something that you're known for if you're on the restaurant side. What can you be serving up to people when they come in? I bet you've not before been asked what an interview should smell or taste like. There's a first time for everything, but always keep in the back of your mind the idea of moving from dialogue to experiences. It will set you apart from other employees who are vying for the same candidate. As you're thinking about how to integrate experiences into your interviewing, let's talk about the actual process and how it unfolds. When we talk about the actual meeting with the candidate, that is only part of the process. In fact, 1/3. The preparation and the follow-up are just as important. We're going to talk for a bit about each of these components of the interview, the preparation, conducting, and follow-up, and how to integrate experiential elements into each. Starting with preparation. That dreaded Outlook reminder pops up with its ding. We see it on our calendar. Often it's a rush job as we scramble to find the application, to remind ourselves what we're hiring for and who we're meeting. That preparation step may take 30 seconds or maybe a little bit longer, depending on if you have a very organized desk or inbox or not. We may or may not have the job description with us. We may or may not have reviewed it. We might not even have a job description for the position. For many of us, this is a habit we've fallen into from time to time, or maybe even all the time. And I'd like you to consider working against that inner urge to be in a hurry and instead understand the value of the investment of time on the front end. When I was 14 years old, I had my first job interview at Pizza Hut South in Aberdeen, South Dakota, not Pizza Hut North. There were two rivals. I walked in and asked for the manager who had scheduled the interview with me. She looked at me very confused and asked, "Who are you again and why are you here?" It felt awful. So awful that I'm still talking about it 30 years later and still sending her notes on Facebook every time I tell this story during a training. She ended up being a really great mentor and boss and leader, but her lack of preparation really had an impact on me, obviously, and so easily could have been avoided. There is no worse feeling than to feel unimportant or forgotten about. So the real question is, as I'm sure many of you have C-suite leaders focused on the bottom line and how money is allocated, how much time and resources are required to process a termination? I know for me, just the administrative tasks alone take over an hour in our organization by the time I cancel benefits, send COBRA information, post the newly open position online, etc. So what if that time was on the front end? If you're going to spend that time anyway, why not use it making better and more informed hires? And that starts with selection and how we select people. So let's talk about what preparation could look like to make it more effective and insightful. I'll repeat again that it takes time. First of all, where are you meeting your candidate? Currently, that might mean finding a booth in a restaurant or a corner of the lobby, clearing off some space on a desk. I'm hoping that after today, it means that you've prepared actual workspace, as in where the candidate would be working, and notified anybody on shift that day that you will be in their space with a job candidate. Create the environment that you expect them to create for your guests. If you're interviewing a cook, they need to see the kitchen. If the candidate is a bartender, they must see behind the bar. We refer to this as a realistic preview of what the job entails. And that means showing candidates the exact workspaces, supplies, the good, the bad, the ugly that they may have in their future. It also includes asking candidates to show you how they would do certain tasks. When you are looking at an application or resume, what are you noticing? The application or resume gives you a first glance at how the candidate presents themselves. This might also be the time to review your application process. Is it asking the right questions? Is it in your brand voice? Is it so cumbersome that you are turning off potential associates? At my last company as a team building, yes, we called it that, the entire HR team went in and applied for a job on our online portal. It was awful. The process was so overwrought and overthought and so long that many of us wanted to give up. We were thankful that we had applied at a time before online applications were a thing. And we changed our process because of it. And we made it shorter and more concise and really had it reflect the brand. So be sure you know what your application process is like from the applicant's perspective. Next, are you able to clearly and quickly see whether they meet the job requirements? And you know that by looking at the job description, which hopefully A, exists, and hopefully B, someone is reviewing at least annually to ensure accuracy, consistency, and relevance. I do this in my organization now, and it's things like moving away from asking people to be fluent in Microsoft Office and instead making sure that they can use mobile devices and download apps and understand new and changing technology. Lastly, your preparation also needs to include your interview guide. This is the piece I struggle with the most personally because I inherently don't care for a lot of structure in my interviews, but the consistency is so important, and using a guide helps keep us objective, hold all candidates to the same standard, and make sure that nothing is missed. So when we don't spend a lot of time on preparation, your internal dialogue during the interview might go something like this, especially here in Minnesota where I am. It might sound like this. Oh, I see he's wearing Viking socks. I love the Vikings. Oh, and he's right-handed, just like me. Oh, look, he has a sticker for Sibley High School on his car. That's where my son goes. And he drives a Mazda too. Oh, geez, if we already have this much in common, I bet he's also really outgoing, detail-oriented, really good with grammar and spelling, very responsive and accountable. Oh, he's just like me. And that's what I want for this role. I love him. He's hired. It sounds outrageous, but something like this just happened at one of my hotels. One of our top associates referred another person for an open position. We thought, yes, we have another Jeffrey. If Jeffrey's referring him, certainly he'll be another Jeffrey. We asked about 2.5 questions. He smiled and said yes, and we were done. So fast, hardly took any time. Well, he lasted a week. He was not a Jeffrey, and I thanked my department manager for giving me a perfect story for this webinar session today. So I want you to not have a not Jeffrey. So what I want you to do is think right now of a critical position in your organization. On the next slide, I'm going to give you a simple framework just to help you kind of fine-tune your interview process and make it an experience instead of just a conversation. But for now, just think of a position and then think of someone who is very successful in that role, the best there is, the person you would clone. Why are they the best host or room cleaner or salesperson or cook that you can think of? What key competencies have they mastered? The knowledge, the skills, the attitude, all of those things. Now consider, what do you do in the interview to determine if candidates have those qualities? Or what can you do? Is it a question you can ask? A process you can use? Sometimes it's a question. I'm not here to hate on questions. They have their place. But sometimes it's a process or an experience that helps you move away from just dependence on questions alone. They definitely have their place, again, but experiences are what will help you uncover the talent that you're seeking. So here's a very simple framework I ask my own team of leaders to use when creating their interview guides. I ask that they create one for each position on their team and then save it so that everyone can use it and we aren't constantly reinventing the wheel. The things I ask you consider, the things that make that person the best at what they do. What competencies do they have mastered? You just simply list those in the left-hand column under key competencies. The right column, that's where I say that's where the magic happens. It's where you use your creativity and your experience to determine something besides a question to determine whether the candidate has what it takes. So consider this first bit of an interview guide I created for the role of HR generalist. I'm so lucky personally that I have one of the best in the business working beside me every day. So it was easy for me to come up with the key competencies, but I also asked others on the leadership team what they thought made her outstanding at what she does. I synthesized their feedback with my own impressions, and that became the key competencies list. What you're seeing here is 3 of the 9 that we ended up listing for this position. Then came the challenge. It's much easier to think of questions than it is experiences. We know to ask for examples. We know not to use yes/no questions. We know that questions should start with tell me about a time or give me an example of. It's much more difficult to come up with experiential tools to measure competencies. So here are a few of the things that I came up with, or we came up with. There are more that I'm sure. I'm sure there's more. I've not had to replace my generalist, but if I do, I will fall apart inside, but at least I will have a beautiful interview guide. So just taking a look at let's look at the second one, the key competency, accountability to deadlines. I could say, tell me about a time when you had a deadline and you met it. Well, that's, first, it's boring, but a way to make that into an experience is when the candidate departs, ask that they provide you with something, 3 references, by a certain time the next day, and notice that the deadline is met. It's a much more tactile way of finding out if they have accountability to deadlines. Outstanding communications, verbal and written. Ask the candidate to write a sample email introducing a new attendance policy with the audience of all associates. Then read the sample to check for diplomacy. Did they include what's in it for the associates? Was their spelling and grammar appropriate? These are ones that I've put together, but you get the idea of how to move away from just questions and actually come up with how to uncover the competencies using experience. Fast forward, now that we have our list of questions and experiences, we've set the stage, we've planned our space, we're ready to meet our candidate, and our brand new shiny interview guide is in our hand. We've taken the time to prepare, and now it's showtime. So first and foremost, be hospitable. It is our industry. Model what we expect our employees to do. Be on time. Offer a beverage. You've probably heard it said, even if the candidate is not a future employee, we want them to be a future guest. Explain to them what your time together will look like. Tell them what to expect. Please tell them ahead of time, though, if they will need things like non-slip shoes or specific clothing for any part of the interview. You don't want to wait until they've arrived to tell them they'll be walking on a slippery kitchen floor. Then use the interview guide you have for that position. Create the experiences, ask the questions, and this is when you begin to observe. In fact, you should only be doing a limited amount of talking, which for some of us is quite a challenge, but you are in observation mode now. Notice if the key competencies are on display. If a sense of urgency or fast pace is one of your competencies, consider walking and talking to check the sense of urgency and pace. One of my favorite housekeeping leaders walked the halls with her candidates, just casually in conversation, to see if they kept her pace. If they did, to her it meant they could clean a room to perfection in 26.7 minutes. They had that sense of urgency. If they were lagging behind her while walking through the halls, it meant to her that they wouldn't have the sense of urgency required. And just on that one experience alone, she was able to glean so much information. It's certainly nothing I would have thought of in terms of interviewing housekeepers, but it was an experience she created to uncover the talent. If authenticity is a key competency, for example, notice if the candidate's behavior seems organic and genuine, or if it's rehearsed and inauthentic. Make sure that you have all the information you need when you go through that guide to make a determination about your next steps. Allow enough time so that your time with the candidate never feels rushed, unless remaining calm while being rushed is a key competency. Then feel free to rush just to see how they react. At the conclusion of the interview, and bear with me here, I hope you're seated. If you think you have a great candidate, ask them to go home and think about it. I'm imagining that this idea causes some of you actual physical pain, especially with the low employment rate and typically high turnover in our industry. Take a moment and consider a candidate that you hire on the spot versus one who goes home, talks to family, thinks about what they experienced, and is still so excited to take the initiative to call you back the next day with interest. Which do you think has a higher likelihood of success in the role and longevity with your company? I had a food and beverage manager get really upset with me recently because a candidate called the next day and said after talking with her spouse and thinking about the amount of lifting and the speed and detail required to be a banquet server, she felt the job would be too stressful for her. And when I asked the manager why she was upset, she said, because she was ready to take the job until you made her sleep on it. I continued to ask what the outcome would have looked like if the candidate had started and realized a few days later that she wasn't a fit. We would have ordered uniforms and a name tag and spent hours on orientation and training just to have the same outcome. I know it's difficult. I am one of the least patient people to inhabit the earth, but it's worth it. Again, time being spent on the front end saves you from spending time on turnover. On the other hand, if you do not wish to move a candidate forward, inform them of the next steps and timing and honor your word. For me personally, if someone has come on site for an interview, they deserve a personalized notification of decline, whether I send an email or a phone call. Be gracious. Credibility and reputation management are key. You may be familiar with Glassdoor. It's a website and an app that is essentially what I call the TripAdvisor of employment. Anyone can post a review of an employer, of a workplace, including the interview process. And more candidates are checking TripAdvisor, they're interchangeable for me. Check in with Glassdoor before they apply at a certain company to see what kind of interview experience other candidates have had and to see what the employment experience looks like. Again, if they are not a future employee, they might be a future guest, and we want to make sure that they have the best impression of our organization, whether they're hired or not. Then you complete an interview evaluation. Guess what? It's going to be so easy. All you do is evaluate the exact same competencies from the interview guide. I have a very simple template I use with really fancy technology called copy-paste, and I copy the competencies onto a new page and make my notes and ratings next to each of them for each candidate. Very important to do this so that when our memory fails us, we can go back and see how an applicant scores. A lot of times when it's fresh in our head, it's easy to remember, but if we have to go back, we want to be sure that we have our comments and thoughts on those competencies at our fingertips. We in the hospitality industry are all about creating experiences. We expect our employees to read their guests and listen for the question behind the question and fix what's not right. And it's exactly what we need to do during the interview process. We need to create experiences that are meaningful and memorable while investing our time and resources on the front end instead of on the turnover process. We recently calculated in my company that the turnover of one full-time $10 an hour associate cost us $8,000. Yet we are hesitant to wait one day to make a hire. And we so often rush to hire based on one short conversation. Is experiential interviewing a silver bullet? Of course not. You will still have hires that don't work out because humans are humans. But I can tell you that the leaders who use experiential methods have far better retention than those that don't. It's actually something that you can track depending on the interview style and its correlation with retention in any department. Give it a try. If you're struggling to think of experiences that measure your competencies, ask for help. Consult your colleagues or send me a note. I often enlist our front line with these questions. How would I tell if someone is good at shifting priorities? And they will give me examples of things that happen throughout the day that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. Reach out to me. I'm happy to help brainstorm and come up with experiences or share some of the ones that I've used. Even something as simple as show me how you would change the sheets on this bed, or show me how you would carry this tray full of drinks. Things like that are pictures into whether or not the person will have comfort with their job tasks. Again, I'm happy to share any of the templates that I use. And with that, I will open the space for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Anyone else who wants to send in questions, there's a little question mark box that you can send in, and we will read them to Sarah, and she can answer your questions. But I'll start with the ones that have come in, and that is, what recommendation do you have for training operations managers on interviewing who may feel like they are good at interviewing but are set in their ways?
Oh my goodness, I'm laughing because that's a very frequent occurrence. I usually start by telling them that we make the mistake as executive leaders by assuming that all of our managers have interviewing skills, and when we promote people into management positions or hire them into management positions, we just assume that they have this skill set for interviewing. And we have this session that we're doing just to refresh everyone. Certainly don't discount it, but also you can tie it to financials. You can tie this method to how much less expensive it is to invest on the front end than it is to turn a person over. So the financial piece is usually quite motivating. And frankly, a lot of people don't know that they can do these things during an interview. They think that they can only ask questions. They don't always think about actually walking around and doing actual tasks.
Okay, second question is, do you have any tools to help managers evaluate the interview?
Yes, and so it's a very pedestrian process. I explained the copy paste. So I take all of those competencies, put them in a new document, and I actually have a template of this that I'm happy to share. I make a column for the rating, and my ratings are, outstanding, blew me away, average as expected, or not a good fit. And those are not scientific. Those are just the ones that work for me. And then another column and space for my notes. Then at the bottom, I note whether I want another opinion, whether I want to move forward, or whether I want to decline. So we have a tendency sometimes to overcomplicate these tools, but the more you complicate them, the less likely your leaders are to use them.
Okay, the next question is, in this competitive recruiting market, what is a tool or tactic you have seen that will make a company stand out to a candidate?
Honestly, the smell and the taste piece. When I've had restaurant servers come in and we say, here are some new items from our menu, I would love to get your feedback. I would like to get your notes on these. Or having a bartender come in and actually mix and show off their skills, having a cook do the same. Those kinds of things really stick with people. They feel very important. They feel like they're being taken seriously, and they're not just going to be another warm body.
Okay, and I think I have two more questions, but if anyone else has any more questions, send them in now because I've got two more to go. How many competencies do you recommend per position?
That's a great question. I like 6. I don't know why I like 6, but if I say at least 6, then the managers typically come up with 6 to 8, 6 to 10, but 6 is my recommendation where you have everything covered. And the best part is you can change them. If something else pops up and you say, I don't think we're putting enough focus on integrity, or I don't think we're testing for that or looking for that, you can always add, change, and replace as things evolve.
Okay, this one I think is a great question. What are some tactics that you use to make it an experiential interview when doing a phone interview?
That is very difficult. Um, that is very difficult. I'm thinking about how I don't typically do them. I do them if the candidate is out of the country, but I am not out of the country. I'm sorry, out of town or out of the country. I am a big fan of using Skype or FaceTime. I just feel like you get so much more out of looking a person in the eye and making it experiential that way. I think it would be cool to, if you're FaceTiming or Skyping, to actually walk around and show them the restaurant or the hotel or the care center, wherever you are, and actually show them a guest room, show them behind the line. That's not something I've done, but that's something I would recommend, and now I probably will do, because I think that would be really cool and a differentiator as well. Great question.
Okay, another one just came in. How long should an interview be?
Boy, I always overestimate, and then if it's done sooner, great. I would allocate an hour, and then if you're done in 30 minutes, I mean, let's face it, sometimes we know we're done in 10 minutes, right? Sometimes we even have to stretch it out to get to 10 if somebody comes in and we know right away that they are not going to be a fit for some reason or another. Allocate an hour, and then if it's less than that, great. But you never want to feel rushed, unless, again, it's a position that will often feel rushed, and you need to measure that. Another thing I wanted to mention quickly that I declined to bring up, in a hotel environment, my candidates arrive at the front desk and ask for me, and I've given my front desk little half sheets where I ask for their first impressions of the candidate. And so I glean a lot of information from that, just in their, they had a firm handshake. I asked if they wanted water, and they rolled their eyes at me and told me I was stupid. I mean, that's an extreme example, but I love observing candidates when they don't know they're in part of the interview. So a lot of times my front desk really helps me with first impressions.
Okay, yet another one came in. As far as taking candidates into a food production environment, how do you ensure proper food safety? I love the idea of telling them ahead of time that they will need shoes, but how would you address the liability concerns of ops or legal in having a candidate perform tasks without being paid on the clock?
Right. So this is where I would say defer to your counsel, because it can vary from state to state. We have our bartenders here do preview shifts. We don't have any other position at the moment, but the leaders in that department felt it was really most important to gel with the rest of the team. You're not going to come in if you don't have the basic skills. So we know you can bartend, but it's important that that you can gel with the team. So that might mean a waiver. That might mean, them signing something releasing you from any liability. Or you do hire them as an independent contractor for one shift. It really does depend on kind of how the law is in your company. So definitely get input from your HR or legal on that.
Okay, and that is the last question that I have, unless anyone else has any other questions. Sarah, thank you so much. This recording will be posted online later today, so you feel free to share the link with anybody that you would like. And our full slate of 2019 free webinars will be posted sometime towards the end of this month, and they'll start in February. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.